The fear of starting over is one of the few fears that follows us throughout life. It appears when we leave a job and a relationship, move to a different city, or simply admit that the life we have built no longer feels right. Many people believe that this fear disappears once they become older, wiser, or more successful. But the truth is much more surprising. The fear never completely disappears. It only changes its shape. Even the most confident people can feel uncertain when they stand at the beginning of something new. The difference is not that they are fearless. The difference is that they have learned how to walk forward while fear quietly walks beside them. When we are children, starting over seems almost natural. We begin a new school year, make new friends, and learn new skills without thinking too much about failure. We are curious because we do not yet carry the heavy weight of past disappointments. As we grow older, however, every experience leaves a mark. Success makes us afraid of losing what we have gained. Failure makes us afraid of repeating painful memories. Over time, starting over no longer feels like an exciting adventure. Instead, it begins to feel like standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to see what lies below. One of the biggest reasons why starting over feels so frightening is that it forces us to leave something familiar. Human beings naturally seek comfort in routines. Even if our daily life is imperfect, it still feels predictable. We know what tomorrow will probably look like. We know the people around us. We know our responsibilities, our habits, and even our frustrations. Familiarity creates a strange kind of safety. Sometimes we become so attached to what we know that we choose an unhappy certainty instead of an uncertain possibility. Imagine someone who has worked in the same company for 15 years. Every morning follows the same schedule. Every task feels familiar. They may complain about the long hours, the difficult manager, or the lack of excitement. Yet when a better opportunity appears somewhere else, they hesitate. Suddenly, the old job does not seem so bad anymore. Questions begin to fill their mind. What if the new company is worse? What if I fail? What if people think I made a mistake? The fear is not only about changing jobs. It is about leaving behind an identity that has become comfortable, even if it is no longer fulfilling. This pattern appears in many parts of life. Someone may remain in an unhealthy relationship because loneliness seems even more frightening than unhappiness. Another person may continue studying a subject they no longer enjoy because changing direction feels embarrassing. Some people spend years chasing dreams that no longer belong to them simply because they have already invested so much time and energy. In each case, starting over feels like admitting that the past was somehow wasted. Yet this belief is deeply misleading. Choosing a new path does not erase the value of the old one. Every experience teaches us something, even if it does not lead where we expected. The years spent in a difficult job may develop patience and discipline. A relationship that ends may reveal what respect and kindness truly mean. A failed business may teach lessons that no classroom could ever provide. Starting over is not the opposite of growth. Very often, it is proof that growth has already happened. There is another hidden reason why beginning again feels so uncomfortable. Starting over usually means becoming a beginner once more. Adults often dislike this feeling because they are used to being competent. We enjoy knowing what we are doing. We like receiving praise for our experience. We feel secure when people depend on us. But every new beginning takes those comforts away. Suddenly, we ask simple questions again. We make mistakes that seem obvious. We need help. We progress slowly instead of confidently. This experience can be surprisingly painful because it challenges our pride. Many people would rather stay average in a familiar environment than feel inexperienced in a better one. They worry that others will judge them for not knowing enough. They compare themselves with people who have already been on the journey for years, forgetting that everyone was once a beginner. They expect themselves to be excellent immediately, even though excellence has never worked that way. Social media often makes this fear even stronger. Every day, we see people celebrating promotions, buying houses, launching businesses, or achieving impressive goals. Rarely do we witness the months of confusion, self-doubt, and repeated failure that came before those moments. As a result, starting over feels like falling behind while everyone else keeps moving ahead. We begin measuring our first chapter against someone else's 10th chapter, and the comparison almost always feels unfair. Perhaps the hardest part of starting over is that there are no guarantees. We naturally want certainty before making important decisions. We want proof that changing careers will make us happier. We want assurance that leaving a painful relationship will lead to a healthier one. We want evidence that our efforts will succeed before we invest our time and energy. Unfortunately, life rarely offers that kind of promise. Every meaningful decision requires a step into the unknown. This uncertainty explains why fear never completely disappears. It is not a sign that something is wrong with us. It is simply the emotional cost of caring about our future. If the outcome meant nothing, we would not feel anxious. Fear appears because the decision matters. It reminds us that we have something valuable to protect, but it should never become the voice that decides our future. The people who eventually build meaningful lives are not those who eliminate fear. They are the ones who gradually discover that fear can exist without being allowed to take control. What many people eventually discover is that starting over is rarely a single dramatic event. It is usually a series of small decisions that quietly reshape an entire life. One day, someone updates a resume after months of hesitation. Another person signs up for a course they have wanted to take for years. Someone else finally has an honest conversation that they have avoided for far too long. None of these actions seem extraordinary on their own. Yet together, they become the beginning of a completely different future. Looking back, people often realize that their new life did not begin with confidence. It began with one small step taken despite fear. This is an important lesson because we often imagine courage in the wrong way. We picture fearless people making bold decisions without hesitation. In reality, courage usually feels much quieter. It is the decision to continue even when your hands are shaking. It is sending an application while expecting rejection. It is introducing yourself to strangers even though you feel awkward. It is accepting that uncertainty is uncomfortable, but refusing to let discomfort decide the direction of your life. Courage and fear are not opposites. They often exist at the same time. There is also something unexpected that happens after we begin again. The fear that once seemed overwhelming slowly changes into something else. It does not disappear overnight, but it loses its power. As we gain new experiences, our confidence starts to come from evidence instead of imagination. We discover that we can solve problems we never expected to face. We meet people who support us in surprising ways. We recover from mistakes that once seemed impossible to survive. Step by step, Our mind replaces imagined disasters with real experiences of resilience. Ironically, many people later admit that the hardest part was never the new beginning itself. The hardest part was the months or even years they spent thinking about it without taking action. During that period, fear had unlimited space to grow. Every possible problem seemed enormous because none of it had been tested against reality. Once they finally moved forward, they discovered that some challenges were real, but many of the worst scenarios had existed only in their imagination. Waiting had been more exhausting than trying. This does not mean that every fresh start leads to immediate happiness. Sometimes a new job is more difficult than expected. Sometimes a new city feels lonely before it feels exciting. Sometimes rebuilding life after heartbreak takes much longer than anyone wishes. Starting over is not a magical solution that removes every obstacle. Instead, it offers something far more valuable. It gives us the chance to build a life that reflects who we are now instead of who we used to be. People change constantly, whether they notice it or not. Our priorities evolve. Our values become clearer. The dreams that inspired us at 20 may no longer fit the person we become at 40. There is nothing shameful about this. Growth naturally changes our direction. The real danger is not changing paths. The real danger is refusing to change simply because we are afraid of looking inconsistent. Sometimes we hold onto an old version of ourselves long after we have outgrown it. We continue performing a role that no longer feels honest because we fear what others might think if we choose differently. Life becomes much lighter when we stop treating every decision as a permanent definition of who we are. Choosing one career does not mean we must stay there forever. Falling in love with one dream does not mean we cannot discover another. Even mistakes do not have to become lifelong identities. They are chapters, not entire books. Every chapter teaches something, but no single chapter has the authority to define the whole story. Another comforting truth is that almost everyone is starting over in some way, even if it is invisible. The colleague who seems successful may secretly be learning how to become a parent. The friend who appears confident may be rebuilding life after a painful divorce. The entrepreneur who looks fearless may still wake up every morning wondering whether the business will survive another year. We often compare our private fears with other people's public confidence, forgetting that everyone carries struggles we cannot see. Once we understand this, we feel less alone in our own uncertainty. Perhaps this is why the fear of starting over never completely disappears. Every meaningful stage of life asks us to leave something behind. We leave childhood to become adults. We leave old identities to discover new ones. We leave familiar routines whenever growth demands more from us. If fear vanished entirely, it might mean we had stopped growing. In a strange way, fear becomes evidence that we are standing in front of a meaningful opportunity rather than repeating yesterday without question. Years from now, most people do not regret every mistake they made. Instead, they regret the possibilities they abandoned because fear convinced them to stay where they were. They wonder what might have happened if they had trusted themselves a little more. They imagine the conversations they never had, the dreams they never explored, and the lives they never allowed themselves to experience. Regret often grows more painful than failure because failure eventually teaches us something, while regret leaves us wondering forever. So, if you are standing at the edge of a new beginning, waiting for fear to disappear before you move, you may be waiting for a moment that never comes. Fear is not the signal to stop. More often, it is the signal that you are approaching something important. You do not need perfect certainty before taking the first step. You do not need every answer before making a decision. You only need enough courage to believe that whatever happens next, you will learn, adapt, and continue moving forward. Starting over will probably never feel completely comfortable. It will always involve questions that cannot be answered in advance and risks that cannot be avoided. Yet, every meaningful transformation in life begins exactly there, in the uncertain space between the life you have known and the life you have not yet lived. The fear may never completely disappear, but neither does your ability to grow. And in the end, growth is almost always stronger than fear, even when it speaks in a much quieter voice.